Part 10. Infinite Doomsday Start Draws Luodu Mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 91. However, just as he was about to control two remote-controlled machine guns to free these half-orc slaves, the female warrior over there actually exclaimed. Ruger hurried over and saw the female warrior, who was curiously checking their helmets, was pointing at the face of an orc and exclaiming, "Kohler, how could it be you? How do you know him?" Ruger's heart trembled, and he felt that things seemed to be going in a worse direction. Yeah, the shocked female warrior nodded slowly after hearing this. "Not only do I know him, but Tia also knows him. He is the eldest son of the family that has been helping Aunt Catala's alchemy workshop. After the alchemy workshop was targeted and closed by those guys of the Nephilim supremacists, I heard that this family was also excluded. Then one day, their whole family suddenly disappeared. At that time, Tia thought they were assassinated by those people, and she was so angry that she went to the town manager to complain, but it ended up in vain because there was no evidence. I didn't expect to see him here again in the end." As she said, the female warrior looked at Ruger. "I can't be sure about others, but I just think they look familiar, but I'm sure this person is Kohler. Look at the corner of his right eye. This is where he was accidentally hit by a spark when he was working for me and Tia. I treated him at that time. Look at the suture marks that look like spider legs. They were left by my poor skills back then." At this point, the female warrior couldn't help but touch the man's forehead with a half-nostalgic and half-hearted feeling, but the man was scared and retreated repeatedly, but had to stay where he was under the effect of the exoskeleton. Ruger, who was watching all this with a bitter face in the back, couldn't help but sigh, thinking that it was indeed the case. He had long suspected that with the technology mastered by the ghosts, they might be able to easily create orcs with stronger physical strength, but their intelligence was unlikely to be too high. At most, they were the useless orc infantry stationed in the camp before. But there were really too few things that infantry of that level could do. For things like working on the production line, even if there are exoskeletons to nail them firmly in place and leave them nowhere to run, it is only a temporary solution. When the beasts are in full swing, they will still vent their unlimited energy on these manufactured products. That will not only cause a sharp drop in work efficiency here, but also cause huge waste. In addition, the orcs outside are not wearing brainwashing helmets. When Ruger saw these helmets before, he just thought that perhaps the ghosts replaced the useless beast brains of the orcs with electronic brains. However, combined with the various doubts that the ghosts have revealed so far, Ruger vaguely feels that things don't seem to be like that. When Lao Guozhao tells the general structure and working mode of the brainwashing helmets he has discovered, Ruger can be completely sure that his previous guess about the orc slaves is wrong. The more types of ghosts he has seen along the way, the more strange Ruger feels. It is said that these guys have a very high level of technology, especially in biological transformation, which is completely beyond Ruger's cognition. But in some simpler and more basic electronic technologies, they always give Ruger a feeling of being too stingy. They seem reluctant to create more ghosts that use electronic technology. At present, only flying mobile phones use more electronic technology. Even those mecha zombies give people the same feeling as these laborers. It seems that some kind of organism or monster with its own intelligence is used to replace the electronic chip to control and guide the exoskeleton. Or conversely, those half-skeleton and half-zombie wearing mechas actually only play the role of controlling the electronic chip of the mecha. So the ghosts give Ruger the feeling that they are not lacking in technology, but seem to be stingy in using electronic technology because of insufficient raw materials. Another example is the remote-controlled turret. Using a machine gun crab that has undergone surgery to replace the remote-controlled weapon station is a very advanced concept in technological development. However, from Ruger's perspective, the cost-effectiveness is definitely not high. Even if the organism itself is zero cost, the cost of adapting it will not be low, and it is definitely not as low as the cost of the remote-controlled weapon station. The only reasonable explanation that Ruger could think of was that the ghosts trapped in the underground caves by the monsters had very limited electronic chips in their hands, and most of them had low computing power. The limited chips could only be supplied to the flying phones that served as battlefield commanders. The remaining chips that did not have enough computing power but could at least listen to simple commands were made into things such as brainwashing helmets and used in key positions. For example, the production line that needs precise control here. Another example is the grassroots ghost leaders who accept the leadership of the flying phones and then lead their subordinates. Then there is another problem. These simple chips can allow the controlled or the user to receive simple commands. However, if you want to participate in the operation of the production line, the labor force itself also needs a certain amount of wisdom. Going on the assembly line means repetitive labor, which is true for skilled workers, but for novices, they still need to use their brains and study hard for a while. Therefore, when Ruger saw the half-orc slaves, the question in this place was never explained. Until the female warrior called out the name of the human who was transformed into a half-orc. Now, Ruger suddenly understood, as if he had suddenly realized the truth. No wonder the old noisy man who came here 20 years ago has no memory of fighting with the ghosts who used a lot of firearms. Perhaps the ghosts had discovered this underground arsenal, but because there were not enough production workers, they could only occupy a treasure mountain gold mine in vain and could not mine it. It was not until the ghosts seized humans with sufficient intelligence through some unknown channel and transformed them into stronger half-orcs that they finally had slaves to make this production line run. Why use humans instead of those half-orcs transformed from beasts? In Ruger's opinion, the answer is very simple: the latter's brain is not developed enough. It's like no matter how much you optimize a set of software in 2020, it is difficult to optimize it to the level that can be loaded on an old computer in 1998. Because the difference in hardware alone is tens of millions of times. Even if the human brain has not been sufficiently learned, its structure is far more complex than that of animals. Even the human brain should have been brainwashed by the ghost with knowledge such as the production line work manual. In this case, brainwashing the beast brain should also work. But the difference in hardware between the two is huge. The ghostly probably tried it, but finally chose to transform humans. Perhaps, the orcs who served as guards on the ground were the byproducts of this experiment. From their combat performance, it is obvious that they are not very useful. The ghostly always transforms based on the natural advantages of a certain creature. From this point of view, transforming humans into laborers for precision processing is not in line with their usual methods. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 92. For a moment, Ruger even wondered if it was because of this land that the ghosts developed such characteristics. After all, although many countries have done this kind of biological experiment, there are only a few that can really do it well. An island in the east, a continent in the west, and so on. And the European continent seems to be the most representative. Perhaps, it was an experiment conducted in a laboratory in this country that went wrong, resulting in the creation of ghosts and then destroying mankind. Oh no, according to the plot of Resident Evil, perhaps the ghosts were originally created as biological weapons, but they were out of human control. Thinking of this, Ruger hurriedly shook his head and temporarily put aside these assumptions that had no evidence and were just speculations. He hurriedly jumped off the chariot and came to Minerva, who was a little at a loss. "Simba, come here and help me pay attention to the brain tissue in this guy's helmet." Ruger waved to Lauquoque. The shadow lynx over there was quite cooperative. Upon hearing this, he immediately ran over and put his head directly into the man's helmet, acting as a brain scope for Ruger. Seeing it so well behaved, Ruger nodded and turned to the female warrior who was still a little confused. "Minerva, help me control this man and don't let him move around." "Okay." The female warrior clasped the man's arms with her arms in a daze, and finally reacted. You want to help him take off the helmet. But, Can it work? You have to give it a try, Ruger said in a deep voice, took out a wrench and screwdriver and other tools that didn't look like tools for human surgery at all, and started to dismantle the helmet. However, the dismantling had to stop just halfway through. Because as Lauquezeo said before, a considerable part of this person's brain has been opened and closed in the helmet. Ruger is not a medical expert specializing in the brain. Lauquezeo can see through electronic products but cannot see through the human brain. If he forcibly separated the man's brain from the helmet, there was a 90% chance that the man would immediately become brain dead. Seeing him suddenly stop after working for a while, the female warrior immediately understood something. She looked at him and then at the man, and couldn't help muttering, "He's hopeless, isn't he?" Yeah. Although Ruger believed that if there were real experts present, the man might be saved, but judging from their current abilities, the female warrior was right. This man is hopeless. Even if Ruger kept injecting him with the system's treatment needles during the operation, it could only ensure that his body was alive all the time. Brain death is still difficult to avoid. Seeing that Ruger confirmed his guess, the female warrior's face showed sadness. However, she quickly calmed down and looked at the man and said in a deep voice, "Then, do you have a way to wake him up? Even if it's only for a while. I want to know how he was caught here. Was he attacked in the wild, or?" Ruger was stunned for a moment, and then understood what she meant. The female warrior was worried that it might be the people in Rogtown, or in other words, those Nephilim supremacists, who threw humans here. If that was the case, those guys were not only involved in the massacre of ordinary humans, but were also likely to have some connection with these ghosts. In that case, things would be serious. After figuring this out, Ruger immediately nodded and gave her a positive answer. After discussing with Lauquezeo for a while, the man and the cat immediately started to work. Their method was not new, that is, to find a way to destroy the brainwashing device in the metal helmet, but at the same time to ensure that the man's brain tissue was not damaged. Although the whole process was not long, it was quite tiring. Fortunately, they finished it. Ruger even took out an electronic chip from the man's helmet in the end. This chip is smaller than most chips on home computers, not to mention compared with core components such as CPU and GPU. If you have to say, this thing is at the same level as the electronic board in Ruger's small fan with neon lights. Its ability is not strong. Even after fiddling with it for a while, Ruger guessed its origin. This thing is likely to be an electronic chip that controls engine ignition and other functions on a modern vehicle. Or in other words, this thing is likely to be recovered by the ghosts from the wreckage of the tank of the Mountain Special Operations Battalion. There are at least dozens of electronic chips of this level on a complete modern tank. This confirms his previous guess that the ghosts have very few electronic chips, so they can only make the best use of them and not waste them. While he was fiddling with the chip, the former Roguetown human named Kohler, who was out of the control of the brainwashing helmet, slowly woke up. His performance was like a patient who had just woken up from a long coma, weak and confused. However, when he saw the face of the person in front of him clearly, the blood color immediately returned to his face. Not to say that he was full of vitality, but at least he was refreshed. Just seeing his performance, Ruger, who had just put away the chip, couldn't help but sigh in his heart. He knew that this person's performance was most likely a last gasp. Lady Minerva. Oh, I made a mistake in Lady Tia's alchemy experiment again. It sounded like he was still brooding over his previous mistake. When he saw Minerva this time, the first thing he thought of was that failure. But soon, he cried out in pain, and his hands unconsciously touched his head, trying to relieve the pain there. However, when he stretched his hands over, he found that his fingers were not touching his scalp or hair, but a set of cold metal shells. What is this? While speaking, the previous memory seemed to finally be awakened, and his body seemed to tremble uncontrollably. At that moment, even if he did not cry out in pain again, everyone who saw him could instantly feel the pain from the depths of his soul. Seeing this, the female warrior hurriedly hugged him in her arms. After the transformation of the strange half-orc, he was at least more than 1.8 meters tall, and he was hugged by the female warrior who was more than 1.9 meters tall, still like a child who sought comfort from his sister after a nightmare. "It's okay, Kohler, it's okay, I'm here." The female warrior Minerva, who had always been heroic, spoke in an indescribably loving and gentle tone at this time, as if there was some kind of magic, which made people feel extremely relieved. Although, Ruger could vaguely hear a hint of crying in that gentle voice. Comforted by her voice, Kohler, who had been shaking with pain before, finally calmed down slowly. His face, which was distorted by pain and suffering, gradually showed a peaceful smile. However, the light on his face also slowly dissipated. The darkness like death approaching gradually spread on his face. Seeing this, Ruger couldn't help but look at the female warrior. But she gritted her teeth, wanting to ask him what happened, but afraid of irritating him and making him unable to enjoy this last tranquility. Her expression was very tangled. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 93. Just when he couldn't help but want to ask those questions for her, the man in her arms actually opened his mouth. Thank you, Lord Minerva. I remember everything that happened before. I know I don't have much time, so I try to pick out useful things to say. Please tell Lady Tia to leave Rogtown as soon as possible and go as far as possible. Those people, those Nephilim, can no longer hold themselves back and are about to attack her. All the people in the town who have received her favor, if they had not awakened as Nephilim, would have been driven out of Rogtown. They want to make sure that when they raise the butcher knife to her, no one will come out to help her, even just to say a word for her. And you, Lord Minerva. Those of you who have awakened as Nephilim and are friends with Lady Tia will gradually be transferred out of the town and sent to the front line. It would be best if you can die on the battlefield. If not, they will find a way to let you die in the monster's lair. I know, it all sounds so ridiculous and inexplicable. In this world where everyone is besieged by monsters and everyone can die at any time, those people actually regard Nephilim, Tia-sama, who is friendly to ordinary people, as the biggest threat. This is simply unfathomable. But I swear, I really heard it, I really heard their plot in that mage's house. Haha, do you know what's the most ridiculous thing? While they vowed to drive out the ordinary people who have been favored by Lady Tia from the town, they continue to let people like us work as their servants. I know that even if they choose slaves from ordinary people, they always look for those who are in good health, strong, and not sick or disabled. Even if they ask us to be his slaves, they will consider it a favor given to us, and we should be grateful. But don't they know? Given the current situation in the town, without Lady Tia's help, how could ordinary people like us be strong and not sick or disabled? Cough cough, cough cough. Seeing him coughing excitedly as he spoke, the female warrior quickly changed him into a more comfortable position, took out a water bag and let him take a sip, signaling that he could take a breather. The man wanted to continue, but he couldn't resist the female warrior. He could only take the water bag to moisten his throat, and then insisted on continuing. I know I have little evidence and it's hard for you to believe my words. I don't ask you to believe it, I just hope you can be careful in the future. Originally we wanted to do something for Lady Tia. We even want to leave Rogtown altogether and build another settlement outside, a home for ordinary people. As long as we can get food seeds. Result. The monsters in the evil cave are already strong enough, but I didn't expect that the monsters in the Lost Ruins would be even more difficult to guard against. I can still remember what those ghosts did to me and all of us when they put this metal helmet on me. I just watched myself, being turned into this kind of monster by those slug-like things. Haha, that's not bad, isn't it? Those guys couldn't even defeat monsters. Now, right under their noses, there is actually a group of monsters that are constantly gathering strength. And they are still plotting against their own people and Lady Taya. Hoo-hoo, even if they are not killed by monsters, one day they will be swallowed by these evil spirits. Ha ha ha, I'm down there, waiting for that day. After laughing for a while, Kohler seemed to have laughed out the rest of his life before turning to look at the female warrior. I just hope that Lord Minerva, you, and Lady Tia can leave there and leave Rogtown as soon as possible. If my family is still alive, if our newly built settlement has not been destroyed, I hope you can help them. Then it is, just north of the cold plains, in the forest to the north. There's a small ruin of the lost there. Demons and monsters don't want to get close there. But there are actually no ghosts inside, only some scattered corpses of the lost. Right. The man's voice became smaller and smaller, so much so that Lugger and Minerva unconsciously leaned in to listen, wanting to hear his information about the new human gathering area. However, he ultimately did not say the rest. By the time Lugger and the two reacted, Kohler had already breathed his last. My condolences. After being silent for a while, Lugger spoke first. Well, thank you. The female warrior slowly lowered Kohler's body to the ground, made him lie down, and reached out to close his eyes that were tired but still trying to open. Don't worry, Kohler, I will convey your words to Taya. Don't worry about your family, we will go there as soon as possible to ensure their safety. You did a good job. Now, just take a good rest. For some reason, after hearing what the female warrior said, Lugger seemed to see the corners of Kohler's mouth move upward slightly. At the same time, the system beeped again. Trigger task. Mission 5, Objective, Save the Human Resistance Army on the verge of destruction. Mission reward, 50-2000 points. Mission 1, Explore the Lost Ruins. Mission 2, Complete Food Transmission. Mission 3, Save Blood Raven Sarah. Mission 4, Unravel the Mystery of the Underground Door Opening. Human Resistance Army. Seeing that the people to be saved in the system mission were not ordinary people's gathering areas, but human resistance army, Ruger's face suddenly became a little embarrassed. In fact, when he heard Kohler's narration before, he felt that this person's words were a little untrue. What if he was a servant of the Nephilim supremacists and heard the conspiracy of those guys? If this thing is to be established, I am afraid that it will take hundreds or thousands of words of supplementary explanation. However, because he said in advance that he didn't have much time and picked up the important things to say, Ruger didn't dare to interrupt him. And later, he briefly mentioned how he was caught by the ghost, and Ruger was also full of questions. This person didn't say it explicitly, but what he meant was that a group of ordinary people tried to get through the evil cave and enter the ghost cave, hoping to get fresh seeds and solve the food problem. Unexpectedly, they failed, so they were all captured by the ghost and transformed into half-orc slaves. Logically, it makes sense. If others heard it, they would not have any doubts. For example, the female warrior didn't think there was anything wrong. But Ruger was different. He just followed the process described by this person. The difficulties and obstacles are not something that ordinary people can overcome. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 94. If this Kohler did not lie about this process, then there is only one possibility. He, or his teammates, are not just ordinary people. At least, in terms of combat effectiveness, they cannot be simply regarded as ordinary people. and when Lugger saw the words Human Resistance Army in the system taskbar, everything made sense. Thinking of this, Lugger couldn't help but sigh. He originally thought that he had traveled to a simple game-like world, but until now, he hadn't even entered the Novice Village. It's okay if you haven't been to Novice Village. Now it seems that even this Novice Village is very complicated. Originally, the Nephilim were divided into two factions, fighting openly and secretly. As a result, even the human side had a resistance army. Resistance? Against whom? It can't be about resisting monsters or charisma, right? The only objects they can resist are those Nephilim supremacists. It is true that wherever there is oppression, there is resistance. It's just like what Kohler said before he died, the living environment is so bad, but the Nephilim are still fighting among themselves. As a result, they had not yet dealt with Tia and other Nephilims who were sympathetic to ordinary people, and the resistance of ordinary humans here was aroused by them. Oh, there is already a human resistance army. Isn't it too much to say that the resistance army has some spies and the like? In order to resist more effectively, they prioritize developing spies and spies around the Nephilim supremacists. Does it make sense? As a human resistance force operating under the eyes of the Nephilim, it is logical to develop the sneaking skills to avoid detection by monsters, right? It's a pity that the rebels, who only noticed the Nephilim and monsters and knew little about the evil spirits in the ruins of the lost, accidentally fell into the evil ways. Is it normal? Therefore, a human resistance army made Kohler's flawed last words instantly make sense. However, Lugger couldn't say these words now. He couldn't say this to Minerva, who was immersed in the memory of her deceased friend. The friend she was remembering who passed away was probably not as simple and innocent as he said. Said that he was probably using her and Tia as well. Even if his purpose is for his family and his tribe, it won't even be detrimental to her and Tia. These words are inappropriate if they are inappropriate. Whether it is the truth or not, the truth or not. After a long time, the female warrior finally stood up slowly. But she still seemed to be wallowing in grief, her body was no longer trembling slightly, and she seemed to be sobbing silently. However, when she turned around, Lugger realized that she was wrong. She was not sobbing, but suppressing her anger. However, seeing her red but slightly dazed eyes, Lugger understood that she didn't know who her anger was directed at. For those Nephilim supremacists? Targeting the charm? Or is it directed at myself, who is defenseless against these things? Ruger, I feel bad. The female warrior looked at Lugger with red eyes, and she was breathing loudly because of anger. Yeah, Lugger hesitated for a moment, but still nodded. I want to do something for him, the female warrior added. Lugger nodded again, and was about to decide whether to take the female warrior deeper into the ground or go back and kill the patrol bees outside. At this moment, he saw the female warrior pick up two long-handled swords and wave them like a whirlwind, killing all the orc slaves who were still working under the control of the brainwashing helmet one by one. But the difference is that this time, there is no broken corpse under the female warrior's sword. Those orcs had their throats cut with a knife and died quickly. The sword technique was so sharp and swift that blood didn't even have time to flow out from the wound. Seeing her raising and lowering the knife, sending the orcs who were probably Kohler's companions into eternal sleep, Lugger slowly took out the fuel from the package. After the female warrior had dealt with all the slave workers, he also came over with fuel and gunpowder from the factory. The wraiths will eat their corpses. Luge only had to say these words, and the female warrior immediately took the fuel from his hand and poured it evenly for each corpse. Before, she raised her knife to start the killing spree in order to free the souls of those humans who were bound by evil spirits. This is the only thing she can do for them and for Chloe now. Then, she would naturally not let their corpses be used by the charms again. Although cremation is not the best way to sleep in this world, especially in this area, it is at least the best choice now. They had too little time to burn the corpses into ashes and take them away, so they could only use fuel and gunpowder to quickly melt them. Use this method to maintain their last bit of dignity. Let's go. After turning the entire factory into a sea of flames, the female warrior walked towards the basement entrance without looking back. Lugger looked at the old World War II equipment in the sea of fire behind him. He endured it again and again, and finally collected only some core equipment and followed the female warrior. Even if she couldn't see Lao now and didn't know it was leading the way, the female warrior quickly found the right path. Lugger originally thought that she had awakened some special superpower in anger, but he didn't expect that she just said softly, "This is the only road here that smells like Kohler and the others." Well, that's quite right. Since Kohler has clearly stated that he was transformed into a half-orc by the slug-like ghost, it is very likely that they were sent directly to the workshop after being transformed. Then this underground passage that is the only one with their smell is likely to lead to the place where they are transformed. The only thing that puzzled Ruger was that the female warrior's nose was so sensitive. After walking in the maze-like basement passage for a while, the two entered an open area again. This area is not particularly large, but it is quite empty. There seemed to be a lot of things placed around, but now they have been moved away, leaving only some drag marks on the ground. Just as Ruger was guessing what this place was used for before, a familiar electronic voice suddenly roared. You sinful humans, you don't know how to reflect on your mistakes and atone for your sins to the gods, and you dare to enter our holy land and slaughter our divine guards." As he spoke, a huge figure slowly walked out from the other end of the cave. It was a tall beast covered in metal armor. "Now, you dare to enter our clan's holy altar openly. You really don't know how to live or die. Well, since you have come to my door, let me enforce justice on behalf of heaven and send you to accept the punishment of God. WQNMD." Before the electronic voice over there finished speaking, the female warrior, who was full of anger and had nowhere to vent, rushed out swinging two swords. Swish! The female warrior's blow to anger was very strong. Even the previous Puma infantry fighting vehicle would probably be cut in two by her blow. However, even such a blow, when it hit the metal behemoth covered with thick armor, could only scratch two shallow cuts on its metal shell. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-Chi-Ji. Chapter 95. Ha ha ha. Overestimating yourself. The speaker was the half-skeleton, half-zombie wearing a powered exoskeleton who had led his men to block Minerva and Ruger on the ground. It seemed that just when the Gaime side sent a large number of chariots to contain Ruger and Minerva, this guy actually ran here and changed his mount. But it is undeniable that the threat of its new mount to Ruger and Minerva is indeed many times greater than before. Under its control, the metal behemoth just shook its head and slapped the female warrior who had not had time to retreat after attacking on the side. Bang puff. Before Minerva, who was slapped away, could react, she was slapped against the wall of the cave and spurted out a mouthful of blood. Google searched "Can. How is it possible?" Seeing this situation, even Ruger couldn't help but exclaimed. On the one hand, he was surprised that Minerva, who attacked with hatred, not only failed to break through the opponent's defense, but was also casually knocked away. On the other hand, he was also shocked by the giant metal beast in front of him. This thing is definitely more than 10 meters long, and more than 7 or 8 meters tall. If it wasn't always leaning forward, if it stood straight like a human, it would probably be more than 10 meters tall. Height and length alone don't mean anything. Just like someone may grow to more than 2 meters tall, but skinny, and even weigh just over 100 pounds. A gust of wind can still blow him down. But this beast is completely different. It's not an exaggeration to say that it has a strong back and strong waist. At least, the thick metal armor makes it look very scary. And besides the heavy armor, this thing's mobility is not bad, and its strength is not small. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to send Minerva flying just by shaking its head. The most important thing is that even though the thing in front of him has been mechanized and transformed beyond recognition, Ruger still recognized the basic skeleton of this thing at a glance. Tyrannosaurus. This is clearly a carnivorous overlord from the dinosaur era tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of years ago. These ghosts actually used the armored machinery of World War II tanks to build a metal Tyrannosaurus. How much do these guys like biological weapons? Even when building a giant robot, they have to create a bionic form. However, looking at the huge metal Tyrannosaurus in front of him, Ruger couldn't help shaking his head. It's called a bionic form, but the mechanical elements of this thing are actually higher. Take the two short front claws on the Tyrannosaurus rex, which are always ridiculed and can be called second-level cripples, but are said to be very useful. Now they have been replaced with two rapid-fire cannons. Ruger estimated that it is probably the same as the one used on the Puma infantry fighting vehicle outside before, which is also modified based on the World War II 37mm anti-aircraft gun. The guy who modified it did not forget to help it retain its characteristics, and embedded a set of iron frames outside the muzzle. At the end of the iron frame, it was left with a set of metal claws. Overall, two cannons with metal claws were built. And this is just the beginning. It is said that the two strong and powerful thighs of the Tyrannosaurus can allow it to drag a body of 7 or 8 tons or even heavier and run at a maximum speed of 40 km per hour. But the maker of this metal Tyrannosaurus seemed to think that this speed was not enough, and actually installed two sets of tracked vehicle chassis under its metal thighs. It felt like this guy was wearing a pair of skates made of miniaturized tank chassis. It was already terrifying enough, but the opponent was not satisfied, and even changed its bloody mouth with amazing bite force that dominated it into something else. Its entire head is a set of metal mouths that look like two excavator buckets biting together. There are no eyes, no nose, and no cameras, periscopes, etc. on the head. It is just a bucket facing up, a bucket facing down, and a set of upper and lower jaws made of metal biting together. The female warrior's furious blow just now hit the upper jaw bucket, and the result was only 2 scratches on the outside of the hard metal. Ruger felt that the upper and lower jaws of these two buckets were made of tungsten alloy. Looking at the front of this guy, it is obvious that the two rapid-fire cannons on its claws are just auxiliary weapons. The most deadly weapon on its body is probably the big mouth that relies on amazing bite force to commit crimes. And now, this big mouth is not only amazingly powerful, but also indestructible. If it bites, even a small honey badger tank will probably be bitten into 2 pieces immediately. A war weapon, this is definitely a war weapon. This thing has high attack power. If the big bucket mouth is placed in this world, it is probably not a problem to say that it is indestructible. The defense is also strong. The thick armor plate is probably tens of centimeters. There is a pair of skates made of tracked vehicles, so the speed is not slow. Looking at the ease and comfort of throwing the female warrior just now, the mobility and flexibility of its metal body are quite high. But in this case, Ruger was a little confused. In order to operate such a big thing, what kind of power device did Gaimei use? The energy consumption of running this thing alone would probably be as much as that of several heavy tanks running at full speed, right? Just to build an ultimate weapon that matches the status of the commander? Ruger was wondering, and the huge beast over there had already abandoned the half-lived female warrior and rushed towards him. Nearly 10 meters high, or perhaps hundreds of tons in weight, the metal beast was running at high speed under the influence of 2 tracked tank skates. The pressure was so strong that even the air would solidify. With the kinetic energy carried by this huge beast, I am afraid that if it hits the small chariot, it will knock Ruger's honey badger apart. However, even so, that thing was not enough. After the speed soared, the upper body actually slowly leaned down, and the buckets that were snapped together on the metal head slowly opened, revealing the jagged and sharp jagged fangs inside. However, it seems to have discovered that this posture will cause the lower bucket to contact the ground, resulting in a waste of kinetic energy. So just halfway through the run, its metal head twisted 90 degrees around its neck, and the two buckets changed from up and down bites to left and right bites. And looking at the direction of the sharp blades on the bucket, I'm afraid it can still use the forward kinetic energy to rush into the enemy's body. It's too much, it's too much. Seeing that a casual hit of that thing actually had the effect of a Doomsday ultimate move, Lugger cursed out loud. However, he didn't dare to compete with this guy in terms of kinetic energy, but if he compared flexibility. He had just used track drift to play with those tanks on the ground. He concentrated his mind and stepped on the accelerator rhythmically to keep the engine speed high. At the same time, after moving the flat muzzle diagonally to the side, he immediately steered the small chariot and aimed the muzzle at the charging giant beast. Bang bang bang. 3 grenades were fired in succession, and although they all hit, the fragments emitted by the grenades could not penetrate the thick armor of the metal Tyrannosaurus, and could not even shake it at all. However, Lugger's grenade launch this time was not intended to kill. What he wanted was to use the recoil created by the large amount of propellant in the grenade to push the tank out in the opposite direction. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Ai-Chi-Ji. Chapter 96. At this time, the mortar howitzer, which had been laid flat and parallel to the ground, had an angle with the direction of the front of the tank. However, this angle was not vertically 90 degrees, but about 120 degrees. The muzzle was pointing at the oblique rear of the tank. As we all know, there is a spade at the rear of the self-propelled artillery that needs to be lowered into the ground when firing. The body needs to withstand the strong recoil when firing with the support of the spade. Ruger's small tank did not have this design at first, and even when the mortar howitzer was just installed, he didn't pay much attention to this matter. But later in actual combat, he found that even if the conventional recoil of this gun had been reduced to a very low level, without the spade, the tank would still move too much. Especially when firing grenades instead of mortar shells at long-range targets. This not only affects the accuracy, but also causes considerable damage to the body itself. So after many experiments, he also installed a spade that moves down quickly at the rear of the body. But in order to balance rapid lowering and sufficient support, his self-propelled spade is a little close to the ground after entering the combat state. This also has an advantage. If the gun is not fired parallel but slightly raised at an angle, even if the spade is not lowered, the vehicle body will press it down due to recoil. At least it can play a large part. But there are pros and cons. For example, now, Ruger dare not let the muzzle and the front of the vehicle fire directly. Even if the gun barrel has been adjusted to be level with the ground, theoretically the recoil of the gun firing will be horizontally backward and will not press down the vehicle body. Because in this case, even if there is a bulge on the ground behind the vehicle body, it will give the spade a forward force to move backward, making his plan to use the recoil to accelerate and escape fail. Therefore, he can only adjust the muzzle to the rear and fire. In this way, the vehicle body rushes forward under the recoil. Even if it encounters a pit during the process, the spade that is tilted backward as a whole will be squeezed and lifted up. As for why the muzzle was not pointed directly to the rear, it was not only because there was not enough time, but also because his gun could not turn to the rear. There was no turret on his small tank, so the gun could not rotate 360 degrees. A 120-degree angle with the front of the car was almost its limit. And such a large rotation can only be achieved by turning the tail clockwise to the left. Because only the left side of the front compartment of the small tank had enough space or groove to accommodate the gun body, the right side was where Lugger was because of the cockpit. But it was all worth it. Under the recoil of the 3 grenades with propellant charges close to the peak, the small tank rushed forward quickly as if the rocket booster was suddenly turned on. And because of the angle problem, it shifted sideways and just avoided the edge of the big mouth of the metal behemoth rushing forward. Ha, eat dust. After confirming from the scout Luodu that he had successfully escaped from the dragon's mouth, Lugger could not help but roar. But before he could be happy for long, the metal beast that found that it failed to bite forward stretched out 2 37mm claw guns and banged at the back of the small tank. The speed of the rapid-fire cannon shells was very fast, at least 800 meters per second. With this flying speed, even if the stability and accuracy of the gun body itself were slightly poor due to structural reasons, a considerable number of shells hit the Honey Badger tank. However, Ruger did not take it to heart. First, the small tank was designed to deal with the ghosts that would come out of nowhere, so even the rear armor was not thin. Although the side armor had been penetrated before, and 2 layers were penetrated, it was shot by the armor-piercing shells of the 75mm anti-tank gun. The special armor-piercing shells of the 75mm caliber anti-tank gun are also comparable to the small grenades of the mere 37mm rapid-fire gun. However, after being hit, when he heard the incredible banging noises behind him, Ruger realized that he had underestimated his opponent. In addition to grenades, the shells fired by the opponent were mixed with armor-piercing shells. It seems that the difference in ammunition will further affect the stability of the artillery during continuous firing. The rapid-fire cannons on the 2 claws of the metal Tyrannosaurus Rex still use 2 different ammunitions. Probably because of this, because of the posture and orientation, the guy's cannon with armor-piercing shells is farther away from Lugger, and the ammunition that hits the tank is less. However, even so, the bullets at the rear of the car still scared Lugger. The armor-piercing shells of the 37mm anti-aircraft gun can penetrate a 24mm thick steel plate at a distance of 800 meters. With the distance between the 2 sides being only a few dozen meters, even if the Honey Badger armor cannot be penetrated, it will cause considerable pressure on it. If someone hits the old wound with a few more shots, the armor of the small tank is not impossible to be penetrated. This aspect is fine, but more importantly, the mortar rapid-fire cannon on the small tank has no turret. Even if Ruger had specially strengthened the gun structure when he built this gun, it would only be immune to heavy machine gun attacks at medium and long distances. From the beginning, he had never considered the possibility of being directly hit by the opponent's large-caliber artillery. So if the gun was directly hit by a rapid-fire cannon, even if the gun was strong enough, it would be more or less affected. Even if you don't care about the problem of reduced accuracy, it would be terrible if the gun exploded due to hidden injuries. So Ruger, who was being hit by the metal Tyrannosaurus double-claw cannon, was busy steering the steering wheel left and right to avoid shooting from behind, even though he was not in danger for the time being. However, as he dodged along the zigzag route, his relative speed naturally dropped. After the metal Tyrannosaurus rushed over, it gradually slowed down and turned to chase in the direction of Ruger's escape. For a moment, the crisis on Ruger's side not only did not shrink, but became even greater. NND, this won't work. If you just hide, you have to do your best, how can you fight back? Just as he was secretly looking for a solution, he heard a roar from not far away. It turned out to be the female warrior who was knocked away before, jumping over again. The bloodstains on the corners of her mouth were not wiped dry, and the dents on her chest armor plate hit by the Tyrannosaurus were still pressing on her internal organs, but she still rushed over with 2 long-handled swords. "Don't!" Ruger shouted hurriedly. He knew that the female warrior probably drank the special red potion of this world, the life recovery potion, and felt that she was fine again. But the Tyrannosaurus monster in front of him was really not so easy to deal with. Ruger's system cannot view other people's information, but he can roughly infer the strength level of the female warrior through the battle power comparison. For reference, The ordinary fallen zombies on the ground are considered level 1, and the nightmare level fallen zombies in the evil cave are considered level 36. The fallen rogues that had fought with the female warrior before should also be novice monsters near the novice village, probably at level 2 or 3. However, their strength is much higher. Although it is not at the nightmare level, it is also higher than the ordinary difficulty. Probably a compromise to nightmare, about 20 levels but less than 30 levels. Infinite Doomsday start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 97. Fighting on equal terms with these guys but with a slight advantage, the female warrior Minerva's level is about 23 or 24. Google search reading. According to Ruger's observation, whether it is Tia, their other two teammates, or even the witch Anya, their combat power levels are probably around this level. It's not that Ruger underestimates Nephilim, thinking that Nephilim has no power to fight back compared to the metal Tyrannosaurus. It's really that Minerva's combat power level is not enough. Just now, she was easily slapped on the head by others, and now it's unreasonable to complete a reversal. Even if the Tyrannosaurus was intentional before, most of that guy's energy is now attracted by Ruger. What's more, Ruger thought, "Big sister, you can fight if you want, why are you shouting? Are you afraid that the Tyrannosaurus doesn't know you are coming, and you have to remind it?" But if Ruger's voice is heard by Minerva, she will definitely call him heartless. Why did Minerva have to shout? Isn't it just to buy time for Ruger to escape? Well, actually Luger was not unaware of this. So, while warning Minerva, he changed his previous zigzag route and rushed straight to another tunnel entrance in front. Quickly retreat, find a place to retreat first, this guy is so big that he can't get into the cave. But as soon as he shouted this, he heard a bang behind him. Looking back, the female warrior was slapped away again with a look of unwillingness and a little confusion. No, this time she was not slapped away, because the bucket head of the metal Tyrannosaurus was still opening and closing towards Luger. She was thrown away by the Tyrannosaurus's big tail. Well, Luger only saw its front before, and didn't realize that its thick tail was still amazingly powerful. When this Tyrannosaurus swung its tail, it felt 3 times stronger than the Tyrannosaurus swung its head. Hiss, it hurts. Luger, who looked back over there, couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. But before he could warm up the cold air, he saw that the big tail of the Tyrannosaurus that had just thrown the female soldier away did not retreat, but instead aimed the tip of the tail steadily at the female soldier who was about to hit him again. Boom! A huge cannon sounded, and a lotus of fragments was directly opened on the gun body. Countless ammunition fragments grew outward like lotus petals, forming a lotus platform that was both beautiful and dangerous, welcoming the flying female soldier. Kai, what are you kidding? Tail, there is a main gun installed on the tail. Ruger really didn't expect that the guy who made this metal Tyrannosaurus would be so crazy. It actually installed a large caliber main gun on the tail of this guy, which looked clearly like an 88mm tank gun, and it fired grenades. As we all know, the famous 88 gun in World War II was taken from the anti-aircraft gun to attack tank armor because the gun body could withstand higher chamber pressure, so it could fire higher initial velocity shells. It's like someone made a hunting rifle for hunting bison and elephants at a long distance. For hunting rifles, the most important thing is the first shot hit rate, because if you can't kill the prey with one shot, they will run away. But to be able to shoot elephants at a long distance, the penetration of this gun must be very high. What will happen if a hunting rifle that originally pursues accuracy has a high penetration? It is easy to be used as an anti-materiel sniper rifle. It is similar to the logic of using 88mm anti-aircraft guns to fight tanks. When it is found that this gun is good, it will naturally be improved accordingly to make it a professional anti-tank gun and tank gun. There are the PAC guns and KWK guns later, and the letters are the abbreviations of anti-tank guns and tank guns. Judging from the barrel length and body shape, This one on the tail of the metal Tyrannosaurus is most likely a KWK series tank gun. As for the difference between the anti-tank gun model and the tank gun model of the same gun, Ruger didn't understand it very well before, but after making a gun and installing it on a vehicle, it became much clearer. The biggest difference is that tank guns are placed in sealed turrets, so they have to make some compromises in terms of structure and actual performance. For example, the recoil travel of tank guns cannot be too high. If it is too high, it will not only affect the gunners, but also the tanks on the move. For another example, the emission of gunpowder gas in a confined space must also be considered. The gunners in the turret cannot be suffocated to death before firing 2 shells. This logic applies to man-made chariots and also to the Tyrannosaurus Rex made by Gaimei. Although the gunpowder gas of the gun probably does not need to be considered when it is installed on the metal Tyrannosaurus Rex, it is all unmanned. But recoil travel and the like must be paid attention to. Seeing that it tilted its tail to fire a shell, but it did not move sideways due to the recoil of the shell, Ruger could confirm that the gun on the tail of the metal Tyrannosaurus Rex was a tank gun. In fact, there is another piece of evidence, that is, the shell it fired at the female soldier was a high explosive fragmentation grenade. This is also the most speechless part for Ruger. The 88 gun relies on its initial velocity and accuracy, and its armor-piercing ability is what it wants. What's the matter with you, metal Tyrannosaurus, firing a grenade with it? What? The target is a person? It's not easy to hit with armor-piercing bullets? Okay, this is a reasonable reason. Then can't you change to a howitzer? This gun has a high initial velocity, so it's not easy for a female soldier who is much faster than ordinary people to dodge. Okay, I've told you everything, you are right. The schizophrenic drama of playing 2 roles in Ruger's mind ended, and he successfully gave a reasonable explanation for the metal Tyrannosaurus to use such a cannon. He was satisfied, but Minerva was still surrounded by the broken Lotus. Minerva, hurry up, use up the potion in the block. He reacted and quickly exchanged the needle treatment potion to the terminal block in Minerva's hand. But he seemed to have forgotten that the female warrior just rushed out with 2 long handles in her hands. In other words, the terminal block on her body was still in her bag. She had no time to get it. At that moment, Ruger's heart was in his throat. Could it be that this female warrior, Tia's teammate and friend, was killed by a cannon? At this moment, the female warrior in the air seemed to wake up from a nightmare, swept away the previous weakness and fatigue, and roared in the air. Ruger saw 2 golden lights flashing from the sword in her hand, and rushed towards the Lotus behind her like lightning. At that moment, the 2 swords slashed back like thunder from the sky, and the wind pressure brought by them was even stronger than the blast wave of explosives. Hit by this sudden strong attack, the Lotus composed of fragments instantly turned into a dandelion, and was blown away by the wind. Even though there were still sporadic fragments rushing towards Minerva's back, the armor there was in the best condition, so it was easily blocked. Damn, this works. What is this? Sword cut in the dark world? But soon he found a bigger possibility from the system data. Barbarian skills. Combat skills. Concentration. Required level, level 18. Barbarian can focus all his strength on one attack, breaking the enemy's defense and cutting through the armor. This combat technique also gives the warrior super defensive capabilities. Although it seems to be inconsistent with the form in the original game, judging from the effect alone, it is quite similar. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 98. The Tyrannosaurus was furious when he saw that Minerva had used such a sword cut to offset his own shell. Google search reading. Now it was no longer busy chasing Lugger, but lifted its tail and fired another shot at Minerva, who had just landed. Then came the second and third shots. Speaking of 88mm tank guns, You often see words such as KWK36L/56 and KWK43L/71. The former is the gun used by the famous Tiger heavy tank Tiger I, and the latter is used on the Tiger II, the Tiger King heavy tank. KWK and the numbers after it can be regarded as their model numbers, similar to the 81 type rifle and the 95 type rifle. Usually this number is related to the actual year of construction or the year it was issued to the troops for use. For example, KWK-36 is inherited from the prototype gun Flak 36, which means it was first put into service in 1936. KWK-43 is similar. But this is a habit, not a standard requirement, so there are actually special cases. For example, the earliest Flak 18 in the series does not follow this rule. As for the L and number after the number, it refers to the caliber of the gun. KWK-36/L56 means that this gun is 56 times the caliber, and its barrel length is 56 times the caliber of 88 mm, about 4,928 mm, nearly 5 meters long. KWK-43/L71 is 71 times the caliber, with a length of 6,248 mm, which is obviously more than 1 meter longer than the former. So the latter is usually called a long 88, and the former is a short 88. The barrel is long, similar to the barrel of a gun. The work done by the gunpowder to push the warhead is high, and the kinetic energy given to the warhead is high. The high kinetic energy of the warhead means that the penetration is strong under the same caliber and mass. The gun on the tail of the metal Tyrannosaurus is more like a short 88 gun. The reason why I use like is because the gun barrel exposed outside is far less than 5 meters long, at most it is about 2 meters long. Most of the structure of the gun is buried in the thick tail. It seems that because of this, the tail has also strengthened the automatic loading of the gun, and the firing rate is more than doubled than the original 10 rounds per minute. Take the 3 shells it just fired in succession, the interval is only more than 1 second, less than 2 seconds. Calculated, it seems to be able to reach 35 or even 40 rounds per minute. This firing rate would be insufficient for a small caliber rapid-fire gun, but it would be too terrifying for a medium caliber 88 mm. After all, this is a cannon, not a rapid-fire mortar. Only when Minerva held her breath and used sword cutting several times in a row to directly block the flying shells, she was not swallowed by the large fragments created by the continuous shells. But concentrating on splitting the fast-flying shells several times in a row and failing to trigger the impact fuse on top also consumed his energy extremely. Minerva, who was full of energy just now, became a little sluggish again. Ruger was not idle either. He took advantage of the few seconds to quickly aim the gun muzzle at the metal Tyrannosaurus and fired a few armor-piercing shells. But the armor-piercing shells in his hand did not seem to penetrate the heavy armor of this guy, and there was no reaction at all. If there is any reason, it can only be that the 88 mm gun fired 4 shells in a row, but it did not fire the 5th shell for a long time. But Ruger did not think that was the result of his armor-piercing shells. It was more like the modified 88 tank gun could only fire 4 rounds rapidly. It was like a rapid-fire mortar howitzer with a magazine. Damn, copying my design. Ruger cursed inwardly, but immediately turned around and continued firing. Nothing else, while the tail gun was loading, the metal Tyrannosaurus stretched out 2 front claw guns and fired at Ruger. He was just cursing. The design of the magazine-fed rapid-fire gun was definitely not copied by Guy, but Guy probably didn't copy him either. After all, although the magazine-fed rapid-fire gun technology used by Ruger was greatly improved by him, it was generally from the cornflower. This is a rapid-fire mortar of the former Soviet Union. Although it was put into service later, in the 1970s, it is said that it was designed as early as 1946. Although the World War II arsenal occupied by Guy should not have that specific technology, they have fought with the local modern army in the 21st century, and may have encountered something to learn from. What's more, Ruger didn't see the real situation of the internal feeding mechanism of the gun, and it might not use the same principle. He said that just to vent the frustration of being frightened by the terrifying firing rate of its gun. Fortunately, after shouting this, his mind became clearer. Remembering that he still had a helper, he hurriedly shouted again, "Simba, go find the weakness of that guy." "Okay." At his command, the obedient old chatterbox ejected again. Ruger dodged and continued to run to the cave entrance, while persuading the female warrior to retreat and secretly planning. In his opinion, the gun on the car no longer dared to use high-pressure ammunition, for fear of exploding due to hidden injuries. And if it could only use mortar ammunition, it would not be enough to deal with the metal Tyrannosaurus. In addition, he had recovered a lot of good things on the ground before, and the points in his wallet had successfully reached 4 digits, so he could make some new weapons. Should we just build a main battle tank, or use an anti-tank rocket launcher or something like that? Or replace the Honey Badger tank with the main anti-tank weapon originally designed, the Dow anti-tank missile? This thing should be powerful enough. The static armor penetration can be simply understood as the theoretical upper limit, which is 1000 mm. The dynamic armor penetration is also 300 mm/65 degrees, which is the average value in actual combat. Even if it can't hit the target with one shot, try a few more times, especially referring to the distribution of the weaknesses of the metal Tyrannosaurus that Laukuzeo can bring back later, it is still very likely to kill it. However, this is a missile with a guided function. Although the Dow uses a wire-controlled guidance, the related electronic equipment will not be too little. Ruger had just confirmed that the Ghost was short of electronic chips and other materials, so he naturally couldn't recover many electronic components from the defeated Ghost Legion. If this part was purchased directly with points, his more than 1000 points seemed to be unable to buy a few Dow anti-tank missiles. Thinking of this, he simply opened the system store panel to find the thing. After a closer look, it was really not cheap at all. A set of launchers plus 2 rounds of ammunition cost 900 points, and each additional round of ammunition after that costs 600 points. But there is a discount for buying more than 4 rounds at a time, 10% off. 10 rounds can be discounted by 20%. And Ruger used the recycled materials as coupons to discount, which only made the basic price 30% off. The more than 1000 points he had were just enough to buy a set of launchers and 3 missiles. Alas! I'm still poor. He really didn't expect that after a series of hard battles, he finally broke through the 1000 point mark. Just when he felt like a rich man, he was hit hard by reality. Make money, make money. At this moment, he suddenly didn't want to rely on the narrow underground passage to avoid that guy. He wanted to kill that thing and exchange it for money. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shan Mao Aichiji. Chapter 99. The mentality changed from passive escape to active hunting, and Lugger's mood immediately became positive. Google search reading. Even after discovering that the so-called passage ahead was actually a dead end, he was not too disappointed. Writing this, I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow diamondsuit. I just couldn't help but mutter self-deprecatingly, maybe, this is fate. Destiny didn't want him to escape, so why should he waste time on escaping? It's just that weapons like Dow anti-tank missiles have been rejected, but it's not like he doesn't have other counter-attack capabilities. The most common tank on the ground before was the tank destroyer. Whether it is a simple version or a finished version, the vehicle is equipped with anti-tank guns. Although there is no big killer like PAK-43/L71, which is the anti-tank gun version of the KWK-43/L71 mentioned before, The armor-piercing performance of other guns is also good. For example, the 75mm caliber Pak-42/L70, the penetration depth of the original ammunition can be close to 200mm at 100 meters. Well, from this comparison, we can see that it is not unreasonable for Dow to be so expensive. But it doesn't matter, this is a door cannon, the cannon is expensive but the ammunition is not. Ruger can completely improve the shell to make its actual penetration deeper. It's a pity that anti-tank guns are all cannons and have rifling. To use the higher penetration fin-stabilized discarding sabot armor-piercing projectiles fired by the smoothbore guns of modern main battle tanks, there are too many changes to be made. It's too late and the price/performance ratio is low. Why not simply exchange it for a smoothbore gun for a modern tank? Luger was still hesitating when he heard a female soldier outside the car yell, "Who should be saved first?" Luger subconsciously sent a new remote-controlled bomb to the terminal block held by Minerva. After finishing, he suddenly realized that something was wrong, why he didn't hear the voice of the female warrior on the radio. Sure enough, the next moment the voice of "Save Your Mother" sounded again, but it still came from outside the tank instead of the onboard radio. This forced Ruger to open the overhead hatch and shouted to Minerva despite the roar of the bomb, "Don't waste your efforts, this thing won't work on it, its armor is too thick." Then he asked again, "Where is your radio? Why is there no movement in your earphones? Was it just broken?" "I don't know. I just talked to you for a long time, and when you didn't reply, I realized that it couldn't be used, so I had to shout." The female warrior immediately shouted back, "It's okay. I'll send you another one. You can take it out of the terminal and put it on. It can be used the same way as the one further away." "Good." While he was talking, the tail cannon on the Tyrannosaurus Rex fired again. After another period of extreme evasion, the two finally contacted each other via radio again. Only then did Ruger find out that Minerva's original set of radios had been placed on the inside of her armpit and breastplate. There had never been any injuries there, and there was no obvious trauma from the previous set. But it just broke inexplicably. Also, be careful. That guy has a weak aura around him, so don't get too close. I jumped over to chop it several times, but before I could chop it off, I felt that I had lost 80% of my 100% strength. My body is also inexplicably weak and tired, and my reaction speed is also much slower. It's just like the necromancer's weak curse. No, it's much better than that. It's like a master-level aging curse cast by an undead archmage who specializes in curses. Such a powerful curse, I'm afraid Woden, his master, or even his master will not be able to use it. The life-restoring potion I brought with me is almost used up, but my body is still weak. Woden is the blonde necromancer in their team, a German. You can use the treatment needles I just gave you. I will send you a few more. They will be considered powerful life-restoring potions. After Luger guided the female warrior to learn how to use the therapeutic needles produced by the system, he muttered again. Is it such a powerful curse? Needless to say, he had vaguely discovered some clues before. The female warrior would look extremely tired every time she got close to the metal Tyrannosaurus before and after being knocked away. But because the time passed so quickly, Luger thought it was because she had suffered internal injuries from being beaten by the Tyrannosaurus. Now I know that feelings are a curse. However, all along, although the charlatans have very strange methods, they have basically not shown that they can use the magic power of the dark world. Why do you suddenly know how to use curses, an unorthodox but high-end method of using magic now? Or is it in the form of a halo? Moreover, the effect is so good. A gust of breeze blew from the unclosed hatch overhead, and Luger himself felt weak. Not good. Alarm bells rang in his heart. Could it be that the metal Tyrannosaurus was overtaking him? Have you entered the range of its cursed halo? But after a while of speeding up and turning, he suddenly discovered that the metal Tyrannosaurus was actually not that close to him. That guy had just taken the hit from Minerva's savior mother, which was a kilogram of RDX explosives. Although the explosion shockwave could not destroy the thick armor of the metal Tyrannosaurus, it blasted out a cloud of dust and enveloped it. Although it was not shrouded in dust for long, after the Tyrannosaurus rushed out of the dust, it seemed as if it was angered by Minerva. It no longer used its tail cannon, and its two small claws began to thrust towards each other. Ruger was still wondering, when suddenly he saw Old Noisy floating down from the top of his head and landing on the dashboard, looking indescribably tired. "No way, that guy's curse is so powerful that even you are affected." "What curse?" Old Noisy replied with tired eyes. "Well, it really seems like a curse. But, shouldn't the curse work on me?" "What happened?" Ruger asked hurriedly. "Where is its weakness?" He didn't ask why he sent Old Noisy out. However, Lauquezeo shook his head helplessly. "I can't get into its body at all, let alone find its weaknesses. It's, let's call it a curse. Its curse is not only on the outside, the closer you are to its body, the stronger the effect. When I attached myself to its outer armor, I felt like I would fall asleep at any time. I tried several times to get in through the outer armor, but as soon as I put a claw in, it suddenly disappeared. When I took it back and looked, it was indeed broken off at the root. Then I circled around the thing. Except for its big head and two big feet, I could get in a little bit. I would get hurt if I got in anywhere else. In the end, I had no choice but to come back." "Well, hurry up, where's your thing? I'll leave you the information and hurry back to the owner. I need to replenish my energy." "Is that so?" Ruger took out his cell phone and handed it to him, muttering in his heart. How could that guy's weakness aura be so strong? Even Old Noisy, who is almost never affected by magic, was made like this by the halo. How strong must it be? Magic. Old Noisy is almost unaffected by magic. Gaimei has almost never shown the ability to use magic. Is there another reasonable explanation? For example, this so-called weakness curse halo has nothing to do with magic. Infinite Doomsday Start draws Luodu mechanic. Author, Shanmao Aichiji. Chapter 100. A range ability like an aura, with an effect similar to the weakness curse or even the aging curse, but even stronger. It can not only affect the barbarian Nephilim with enhanced physique, but also affect the quasi-electronic life without entity and almost immune to magic. And it is most likely not an ability that uses magic. Well, it seems that it can also slightly affect myself in the armored vehicle a few hundred meters away. Ruger collected the information in his hands bit by bit, and suddenly saw that the hatch above his head was not closed, so he hurriedly closed it. However, in just a moment, he felt that the fatigue after being enveloped by the weakness aura had weakened. After a while, especially after giving himself a dose of treatment needle, he felt that the inexplicable fatigue had been swept away. I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network rightward arrow. What's going on? A flash of inspiration came to his mind, and he seemed to understand something. Could it be? Mumbling, he exchanged a small box instrument from the store. As soon as he took it out and opened it, he heard a loud crackling sound, and the pointer of the thing jumped directly to the far right. Now his face looked even weirder. He hurriedly adjusted the measuring gear of the instrument to the gear with the highest threshold. However, after another crackling sound, the pointer of the instrument still jumped to the far right. Damn! It's true. The results of the two experiments were the same. Needless to say, it was this thing. Ruger was in a bad mood. How is it possible? Could it be that just like this underground arsenal in World War II, those ghosts also dug up those things? The small box-shaped instrument that Ruger just took out twice is called a Geiger-Müller counter. It is usually written as a Geiger counter. It is a transliteration anyway. This is an instrument that specifically measures the intensity of ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation, in simple terms, is radiation that can ionize matter. As for ionization, according to high school physics, an atom is composed of a positively charged nucleus, composed of positively charged protons and unchanged charged neutrons, and a number of negatively charged electrons. When they are combined, the atom appears to be unchanged charged to the outside world. When the external input energy is strong enough, it will separate them and turn the unchanged charged atoms into charged particles. This process is called ionization, physical ionization. The energy radiation that can ionize matter is very strong and is very harmful to the human body. The Geiger counter itself also uses the principle that this radiation can cause matter to ionize for measurement. It actually measures the number of pulses generated by the gas in the Geiger tube inside the instrument due to ionization caused by ionizing radiation. So it is called a counter rather than a meter. This is probably the most widely used and most famous radiation measuring device. But this thing also has disadvantages. It is just a counter that records the number of pulses, but it cannot measure the energy level of the pulses, so it cannot distinguish the specific type of radiation. It cannot tell whether it is alpha rays, beta rays, or gamma rays that are at work. Another disadvantage is that because it is a counter, the frequency of pulses generated by the Geiger tube inside under ionizing radiation has its own upper limit. Usually if there are 104-105 pulses per second, it cannot measure any higher. This feeling is a bit like asking a child who can only count to 10 to count the number of people in the family. Under normal circumstances, a family of 3 or 4 people, plus grandparents, is only 7 or 8 people, and the child can count them. But during the Chinese New Year, the whole family had a New Year's Eve dinner together, and dozens or even hundreds of people returned to their hometown compound. If he was asked to count again, he could only count to the highest number he could recognize, 10. Ruger measured twice in a row, and the counter pointer turned directly to the far right, which means that the current radiation rate is higher than its measurable upper limit. It reached its 10. The highest value that Ruger's counter could initially measure was more than 10 microsieverts per hour. Microsievert is the unit of radiation dose suffered by the human body, and its basic unit is sievert, but this unit is too large and there is a big gap with the actual situation, so its small unit is used. Millisievert and microsievert are commonly used, which are 1,000th and 1/1,000,000th of a sievert respectively. This value cannot actually be measured directly by the counter. The counter actually measures the exposure, and the unit should be Röntgen. The relationship between exposure and dose. For example, if an assault rifle can fire 200 rounds per minute, then its rate of fire is 200 rounds per minute. This rate of fire is like the exposure. If you use this gun to shoot someone for 1 minute, can you hit that person 200 times? It seems that it is not impossible. It seems that it is also possible to shoot him with the muzzle of the gun. The number of bullets hitting a person is similar to the radiation dose. The sievert value on the counter is probably converted from the state of shooting the gun directly at the person. So in fact, if this person is wearing clothing that can block radiation, he cannot withstand the dose on the counter. 10 microsieverts per hour is not high. Under normal circumstances, the dose received by each person in China is about 2,700 microsieverts per year. This is because there is also radiation in the natural background. 2,700 divided by 365 days and then divided by 24 hours is about 31 microsieverts per hour, which is roughly the natural background radiation. For an X-ray test, the dose equivalent is about 100 microsieverts. According to national standards, the annual maximum dose for radiation-related occupational workers is 50 millisieverts, which is 50,000 microsieverts, 0.5 sieverts. As for the effect of dose on people, it is roughly as follows. 0-25 sieverts, no significant damage. 25-50 sieverts, can cause changes in blood, but no serious damage. 50-0 sieverts, changes in blood cells and some damage, but no fatigue. 0-0 sieverts, damage, and may feel general weakness. 0-0 sieverts have damage, general weakness, and the weak may die. 0 sievert 50% fatal injury. 0 sievert or more may die as a result. Note that the above uses the main unit sievert. As mentioned before, the upper limit of the earliest measurement of Ruger's counter was 10 microsieverts per hour. Reaching this value is not to say that it is not dangerous, but it requires long-term accumulation. To accumulate to the threshold of 25 sieverts without significant harm, it takes 25 times 1 million divided by 10 hours, that is, 4,000 hours. Obviously, the harm is not great. But the gear that Ruger later adjusted to has an upper limit of 1000 millisieverts per hour, that is, 1 sievert per hour. Even if there is no feeling of radiation dose at this level, the body will still be damaged after 1 or 2 hours of exposure. However, this is just the beginning. Ruger's counter does not mean that the current radiation dose is 1 sievert per hour, but at least 1 sievert per hour. The actual value may be much higher than this. At this point, Ruger has long understood why he feels tired as soon as he opens the hatch, but does not feel so obvious after closing it. Obviously, it is the armor of the tank that helps him to resist most of the radiation. However, even though he was in the tank with the hatch closed, the measured dose was still higher than the upper limit. This can only mean that the nuclear radiation dose emitted by the metal Tyrannosaurus was already sky high. That was already much higher than outside the nuclear power plant, much higher than most areas in the containment of the nuclear power plant, and even higher than the upper limit of the workable part of the workers outside the nuclear reactor. The power plant in the East Asian island country had a reactor meltdown, causing the dose in the containment to rise to about 4-8 sieverts per hour. If humans go in without protective equipment, they will die within a few hours. This level is similar to what Ruger feels like sitting in the tank now. If you go outside and get closer to the metal Tyrannosaurus, the radiation dose will probably kill a normal person in a few minutes.